Hey class, so this is going to be an attempt to add to the other cell slide that I covered in the other audio, where I went through some of the lessons that I learned around um, selling is in my profession, and now I'll try and tie them back to actual points in the the text and in the PowerPoint slides from the text as they relate. So I think one of the things that I had said that selling is nested in the overall marketing process. Specifically, it's nested in the promotion uh, element of the marketing mix, uh, and the marketing mix being the four P's. So, so one of the things that I had emphasized, I hope, when I went through the lessons that I've learned, that uh, there are a lot of things that make a good salesperson, and the book doesn't necessarily follow the order, obviously, of my lessons learned because I just kind of made those up. But one of the really important elements of um, good selling is developing a trust-based relationship with your customers, and you have to watch your salespeople if you're managing them to make sure that they're doing the same. Remember that one of the things I said I used to tell my salespeople is if you treat this particular transaction like it's going to be the last one, it probably is. At the same time, uh, you want to be able to add value to the whole process for your customer. Uh, you have to bring something to the table other than just the product or service per se. So, are you really helping them in whatever it is they're doing, whether it's purchasing a piece of real estate or if you're working with a developer? Are you helping them in their long term or short term needs? Are you dependable? Is what you say not just truthful, but you could be feeling like you're speaking the truth, but in your perspective, in your opinions, are what you telling them based on real knowledge or information uh, that you have educated yourself around? And do you really understand their business so that the advice you're giving them around a particular product uh, is in fact germane to what it is they do? Dang it. The Harvard Business Journal, I haven't read it, but a study was recently completed, and what it said was that employees who whose boss actually knows how to do their job are happier in what they do than if they had somebody working or running them that didn't really know what they do. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you go, well, maybe duh. But you could apply that to what we were just talking about, where are you really, do you know what you're doing as a salesperson and the advice that you're giving relative to the charge for that particular individual that you're selling to or their business in general? Do you know enough about what they do that you really are a trustworthy source in helping them. So you develop that through a series of dialogue or conversations where you're constantly looking outside of those conversations for solutions to their problems, and within the conversations trying to identify new, unique needs that they might have. And this whole issue of being a problem solver is really important. I can tell you that one of the reasons, and I just, there's a part of me that's real uncomfortable actually telling stories about my past, because, when I was a student, I always liked to hear about instructors' actual experience, so it never bothered me to hear stories. On the other hand, there are students, there are instructors who are just talking about themselves all the time. Uh, so I'm sensitive, long story short, to whether or not you just see me as tooting your own horn or what. And so as a consequence, I try really hard not to talk about my practical experience very often, except where I think it's particularly germane. So one of my favorite stories about, for myself, I've never told this one in a class, that uh, when I was consulting, is I got a call one day from a consulting firm on Oahu, Belt Collins and Associates, who would call me from time to time and ask me to run down certain kinds of information. And they were writing a plan for one of the resorts down on the coast, and they needed to have an accurate estimation of the population of Waimea, where I lived. And they asked me, could I come up with a way uh, to define that or estimate it? And so I gave it some thought. The problem was they didn't have uh, municipalities in Hawaii. They just have an island. I mean, that's so they have a mayor for the big island. And so in Waimea, uh, and they split the voting districts right in the middle of town, and they had them combined with other communities in other directions. There just wasn't a good way to estimate it. And so I came up with what I thought was a good way. One of the things that it's like, who has the information? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And the problem I was trying to solve was, what is the population of Waimea? And where does that information that you need to estimate that, where is that housed, or where does it exist? And uh, so I asked myself, what does everybody in this town have or use that's a common thread? And the answer was they have electricity. They use electricity or water. Well, long story short, I couldn't get that information broken down for Waimea with Hawaiian Electric, but I called the water company, and I asked them, can you tell me the number of residential water hookups? My assumption being every house had a potable water supply. They were not. Nobody was on wells. They all were hooked to the county. And they said, yeah. So they gave me the number of residential and apartment, units uh, that had water meters for the unit. And then I went into another database and found out how the last census, what was the average person per residence on the Big Island, multiplied that times the number of water meters, which was a very accurate estimate of the number of units in town, and that was my estimated population for Waimea. And I would imagine that that was accurate within 1 or 2%, which was better than anybody else had. And for that, I got paid, I think, $1,200 or $1,500 for that, and it took me about less than 30 minutes to do it. And so the story of that is, you should be a problem solver, and it's about defining the problem and then coming up with ways to fix it. And that was a sales job. I had to sell myself on answering their question, which was, excuse me, which was, can you give us an estimate? Yeah, I think I can. So I did. Uh, and there's different kinds of selling. One is consultative selling, and that was the example that I just gave you. I was a strategic orchestrator as well as uh, a business consultant, and I wore those hats in different situations. And then once you become a good source of trusted information, you can become a long-term ally for, in my case, it was for consulting firms, for the resorts themselves, and in some instances, the county. You have to have a number of skills, and I would say in college there's a lot of emphasis given to proactive forms of communication, which would include speaking and writing. But I would say one of the things, and I have to work on it, that I really have to remind myself of being an active listener and listening to what people are saying. Nothing does that better for a man or a woman, I think, than being, if it doesn't come naturally. It wasn't something that I learned in my family, that's for sure, growing up. But in fact, that dynamic probably was a real impediment. So I think if you're in good relationships, you have to, they don't stay that way unless you have to listen to the meaning of things in some cases rather than literally what's coming out of the person's mouth. Uh, and that's certainly true in selling. You have to listen very carefully uh, to what, and try to separate the deeper meaning of what's coming out of their mouth versus the actual words. And that becomes even more germane when you get into different cultures. And I worked a lot when I was there with Japanese firms. And again, you have to listen carefully to what they're saying. Here are some skills that the text identifies. Logical reasoning, written communication skills. I talked about those, and we put an emphasis of that in higher education, which is appropriate. But you should also, if you're in sales, have to take initiative, and you have to be very adaptable, especially if you have a dynamic customer base. So, always good to cover uh, issues of ethics. When I first, before I got to the University of Oregon, when I was shutting my company down, they gave me a call. I remember it pretty well, and said, "Okay, what do you want to teach the first quarter when you get here?" And they gave me three different choices, and one of them was ethics. And I happened to be able to teach the last ethics class at University of Oregon that term. Up to that term, it was a requirement for graduation, and after that year, they did away with it entirely, and they nested ethics, as this is the case, into as a discussion in other classes, which I think is a more efficient way to do it anyway, because it makes it more situational and less just simply philosophical. Um, and that was a lot of fun. It was a great class. But again, there is this issue of trust, and trust is something you can only develop over time if the customer that you're dealing with uh, feels comfortable that you're telling the truth and they can depend on you, that you're reliable, that whatever information they're sharing with you is confidential, that you're honest in what you're talking about, that your candor is that you're giving your honest opinion, that you feel free, that you can, it's like no harm, no foul in telling what your perspectives are, that you're fair and open in your dealings, that you're charging them a reasonable price for one thing, or that the prices that you're charging for your products or service are all of these things dependable, reliable, and so on and so forth. So I've actually talked about these things. You want to be an expert. You want to be an expert, not just in the mind's eye of the customer, but you want to have some real expertise. Um, and again, that you want to have this focus, that you want to make this customer a customer over time and not just a one shot wonder. Uh, I'll let you stop this if you want to go through these one at a time. I'm not going to do it because this is we're already at 15 minutes. But these are just things that are unethical in the mind's eye of most people that are selling and most people that are buying. You really want to know your market. This is the whole issue of segmentation and target market. Uh, and I was very clear on when I started to segment. I said that marketing really gave me my focus on how to do what I uh, came to do pretty well. I thought I made a living at it anyway, and that is I segmented my market in the beginning by customers and uh, business market, and I handled them both very differently. I do. So salespeople need to adapt to the style of the buyer to enhance communication. Really goes hand in hand with what I was talking earlier about listening. Um, and also involved in that is understanding who the people peripheral to the decision maker, that the buyer that you're dealing with directly. I mean, there's a lot of gatekeepers sometimes, but again, if you deal with Japanese, you're dealing with a group of people, not a single entity within there, or there may be an Ichiban or number one person, but you have to sort. You really have to understand the dynamics of the decision making process. Uh, you want to blow your horn, but not too loud. But you want to be come across as reliable, consistent, all those other things that are important in their decision making process. And then finally, this is the last chapter. the communication skills. Now, I wrote this thing as a note to myself, and I talked about listening, but something that really resonated with me. My first late wife was just a wonderful genius at engaging with people. People liked her. She was a absolutely awesome conversationalist, and I learned a lot from her just over the years in watching her. Um, but I read something at some point in time when she was alive that I thought really explained why she was as good as she was with people. And it said, remember, this was, I was reading this, remember, interesting people are interested. And when I read that, I thought, my God, that's Francine, that she is such a good asker of questions, personal questions without asking things that are too personal. It's things like, how many kids do you have? What are they doing? Do they, what are, and what you want to do is get people talking about themselves, and you want to be, at some level, you have to be truly interested. You're just not asking for the sake of asking, but it is a gift actually that you can cultivate and get very good at, of engaging with people by connecting with them at a personal level. And and just remember, interesting people are interested. If you're interested in them, then they will eventually be interested in you. And we can ask different kinds of questions: open-ended, closed-end, dichotomous. Open-ended questions are, so what do you think about the political environment at the moment? Closed-in, are you a Democrat or Republican? Or neither? Dichotomous, uh, that might be Democrat or Republican, but I think you get the message that they can be open-ended questions or um, closed-end questions. What is it about my product that you particularly like? Does it do the job that it's supposed to? Yes or no. So figure out what you're going to ask, and that could apply to your products or service, or again about them as individuals. Uh, One of the things that you want to do, I mean, there's some tricks to listening, paraphrasing and repeating. So let me understand this. What did I just hear? Is this is what I just heard you say? Does that capture it? Uh, don't make assumptions. Seek clarity. Seek understanding. Look for nonverbals, like, you know when you made your proposals, did it look like they just bit into a lemon? You know, look for the external signs. And so again, there's a lot of different ways in learning. And again, interesting people are interested, so encourage the buyer to talk. And don't try to get them to talk like, don't ask them too direct questions about things like their competition. Ask questions, safe questions around their competition, like, what do you particularly like? What is it that they do really well? Uh, Pay attention to what they say. Don't go off to la la land, and try to, when they're talking, try to visualize, get a picture in your mind's eye of what it is they're really saying, or it's really kind of vague about what it is they're uh, maybe you're visualizing a solution to their problem, either through a product or service, or gathering information. Whatever. Um, there's social listening and serious listening. and you have to put on your listener hat and figure out in the moment which one is appropriate or germane to what's going on. So keys to effective listening: find areas of interest. Like I told you, interesting people are interested. Uh, Judge the content, not the delivery. Sometimes people have a really hard time talking. So listen for content and not just for how smooth they may be. Wait till you've heard everything. Look for ideas. Be flexible. Work at listening. Um, Resist distractions. Exercise your mind. Capitalize on facts that thought is faster than speech. And above all, I like this one: keep an open mind. Now, you guys are charged to do this in your discussion threads. I don't make the rules, I just impose them, but I think this is a good rule. And it's something that I've picked up from the really good online programs like this and some couple others. That and I use this in class discussion threads. I'm not just interested in your opinion. I'm interested I'm interested in your opinion, but I'm also interested in the facts or information that you have to support that opinion, the source of the facts. Um, so really be cognizant, always be able to support your opinions, and if you can't, be guarded about giving them. Is my advice. Um, Words and symbols mean different things to different people, and that's something to keep in mind. Uh, some people think the flag is uh, should be protected by laws, and some people think burning the flag is a way of free speech. I mean, it's different things to different people, and they both, at the same time, revere its meaning, but the meaning is relative to how they view it. So keep that in mind. Uh, and I could talk for 30 minutes about this last one. That I just think a good vocabulary is an incredible tool when you can use so many different words in context to explain nuances in ways that you think or believe. Nuances itself is a great example of that. Is that these fine distinctions in meaning or performance or whatever. Uh, and that goes right in with writing in the same context. Remember that pictures literally are worth 1,000 words, just like the old adage says. So, use a pie graph is a very simplistic way of explaining a really complex uh, concept if you're having to try to write about it versus just show it to somebody. I do very well with pictures. I do very well with somebody showing me how to do something versus reading a manual. So visual sales aids and such can have the same sort of power in reducing a concept to something simplistic that somebody can see and therein understand. Like I just said, I think there's real power in having a good vocabulary, and so speak. Um, Impacts of logical sequencing. So it isn't just what you say, it's also the sequence that you explain something, particularly if it's a process, you know, just don't just put the wax on the floor first thing, you have to mop it first, you know. And the same thing can be true with a process. This was very important to me in explaining what my value was in the land use development process, all the way from purchase, entitlements, to ultimately sales. I could explain the whole process, and I could involve myself at every step along the way in some capacity, either doing it or overseeing it. Be cognizant of, I really have to work on this one too, especially if I'm selling myself in a job interview or something, you know, what's my body language given away? And so again, same thing in a sales effort. Be cognizant, be aware of what it is you're doing. You know, don't don't unconsciously pick at a pimple on the side of your face because uh, they're talking and you're nervous about. It's the last one and this one. So seminar assessment number 1. Uh, Give me an overview of the distinction between marketing and sales, and 2, read this ethics dilemma case.